Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I'm doing my September wrap-up. I managed to read at least 15 books in September, how God only knows, but because there are so many I'm basically going to try and speak as quickly as possible without stumbling over my words and speak not quite as in-depth as I usually go. If you want to hear more in-depth thoughts on any of the books I mentioned, let me know down below in the comments and I can do an individual review on whatever books. Let's get started. The first few I got from the library, so I will put a picture up on the screen for you, but the first one is Sing and Buried Sing by Jesmyn Ward. This is about a black southern family, specifically the son, whose father is getting out of jail. It feels very much so like Beloved by Toni Morrison, which I read in high school. Sing and Buried Sing I couldn't connect to quite as well. The writing I found very distracting, but I do think it did a really good job of showing the culture of the South and the struggles that have been going on for several hundred years now. Next was Nevernight by J. Kristoff. I also read God's Grave by J. Kristoff because my life is a little bit in turmoil right now and I didn't really know if I was going to have access to a library in October for the God's Grave read-along this month. Anyway, this series is about a girl who goes to an assassin's school to get revenge on her family's killers. I gave the first book a 4 out of 5 stars and I gave the second book a 5 out of 5 stars. The first book just felt a little bit slow, especially in the first 100 pages or so, but after that it picked up and I loved them. They're so good. There's a lot of smut in them, which I wasn't quite expecting that level, but I'm okay with that. And I loved the footnotes. They are just so sarcastic and great. And I read Wonder Woman Warbringer by Leigh Bardugo, which is the first in the DC Icons series. I've read the second one, but you don't have to read any of them in order or all of them even. This one is obviously about Wonder Woman, and she finds a young girl who is shipwrecked off the coast of Themyscira. Turns out this young girl is a warbringer, which means that she obviously brings war in her wake everywhere, and Diana doesn't want to have to kill her, so she finds another way. It was a good book. You've seen the Wonder Woman movie. It's different enough that it's not the same thing, but they're basically just the same thing. It's good, it's enjoyable. I think I gave that one a 4 out of 5. I also read Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is a fairy tale retelling of some sort based in Eastern Europe and Russian folklore. I really enjoyed this. I give it a 4 out of 5 stars. It is about a wizard who lives in a valley and there is a sentient wood. The wizard takes a girl every 10 years from the valley to be a servant of some sort, and the girl he takes this last time turns out to have some sort of magical ability. She and the wizard work together to figure out or defeat the wood. I love Naomi Novik's writing anyway. It was very different for me to read the fairy tale version of her writing versus the temporary version of her writing, because the temporary version is much more antique-y feeling, 19th century specifically, and this was much more modern, which I really did enjoy. The one problem I had with it, it did feel a little bit contrived sometimes, but even so, I still really enjoyed it. Then we get into the books that I actually own. The first one, which is technically the last one, which I technically finished on October 1st, but I'm counting it because I read most of it in September, and had I not put off the Turing biography, I would have finished this one in September. That is Kenilworth by Walter Scott. This is about the love triangle between Elizabeth I, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, and Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart. The actuality of it was that Amy and Robert got married in 1550, and she died in 1560, 2 years after Elizabeth became queen. In this book, which takes place in 1575, Elizabeth doesn't know that Robert and Amy are married, and when she finds out, she's obviously pissed. That actually does happen to other courtiers who don't tell Elizabeth about their marriages, but that is neither here nor there. This book, for a very inaccurate account of what happened, is a really good account of it. I did like that it had actual people, such as Anthony Forster, and I think it's a good version or a good retelling of the events. If you know nothing about it, it's a great way to get into it. And even knowing a lot about this time period and the events that actually inspired it, it was a fun read because I could point out the inaccuracies, and it did have me at the edge of my seat because I didn't know where this was going. Even though I do know that Amy ended up dead at the bottom of stairs, nobody even to this day knows exactly how she got there, so it was fun seeing a retelling. I gave that one a 4 out of 5 stars, mostly just because the inaccuracy bothered me enough. Then the book that I put off was Alan Turing, The Enigma by Andrew Hodges. This is a biographical account of Turing, who broke the Enigma in World War II. Turing was a homosexual mathematician genius, and Benedict Cumberbatch plays him in the movie adaptation of this book, The Imitation Game. This book is written by a mathematician, and I have to say it, mathematicians should not write biographies, I'm sorry. I enjoyed parts of this book, the parts that were not babbling at me about pure and applied mathematics, which I have no interest in and no idea what's going on. There are huge factorials in this, which is where the number is written with an exclamation point after it, so that you multiply every number below the number. So if it's 25 factorial, you multiply 25 times 24 times 23, etc., etc. Huge numbers, beyond trillions, and I don't even know what they are after that. I did enjoy the code breaking section. Also, the organization was just really off. The chapters were anywhere from 50 to 100 pages long, which seemed overly excessive to me, especially because I didn't want to read 100 pages in one go all the time because it took a lot of effort. I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars because, like I said, I enjoyed it, and I think if you were mathematically minded or knew more about math than I do, having last taken calculus when I was 17, it would have made a lot more sense. But to me, it wasn't entirely worth the read. And I read Meet Caroline by somebody. Caroline is the 1812 American Girl. I own 9 of them at this point, including Caroline, and this was just a fun half-hour read for me. Caroline is living with her family in New York in 1812, and she and her father and 2 of her cousins go sailing on Lake Ontario, and her father and her male cousin are kidnapped by the Brits because they are at war, and the British keep taking American soldiers or any male found sailing on waters because the Brits need them for their navy, and the United States gets real pissy about that and the fact that they haven't left after the Revolution. Basically, all of that is wrapped up into 75 pages. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars because these are just fun, quick historical books. I also read Two Dark Reigns by Kendar Blake. This is the third in a quartet starting with Three Dark Crowns. This book was, I think I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. It was good. I liked the second one better, but this one obviously saw the end of that one, and I liked how you learned more about the history and more about some of the older queens, such as the Oracle Queen or the Blue Queen. I did really enjoy that part, but the series just overall feels very stretched out to me. I also read Tudor Adventures by James Evans. This book I actually really enjoyed. I think I gave it a 4 or 5 out of 5 stars because it is about the maritime voyage in 1553, which is during the transition between Edward VI and Mary I's reign in England, when they sent people off to go around the north of Russia to find China and bring back spices and silks and everything else that the Spaniards and the Portuguese had been bringing back around the Horn of Africa. It didn't end well. They lost 2 out of 3 ships. They thought at the time that the men on those ships froze to death. It turns out that they probably killed themselves by burning coal in an enclosed space, which is either carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide, but either way, they suffocated. It's not a happy book, it is nonfiction, but I really enjoyed reading about how the English began their trade with Russia, because this is it. My one problem with that book was simply that the chapters are so short, as opposed to Turing, where they're 100 pages. In the Tudor Adventurers, at most they were 10 pages. More frequently they were anywhere from 2 to 5, and oftentimes they could have been combined to better achieve what the point was. I also read A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. This is a middle grade sci-fi about a girl who has to save her father who is somewhere in the universe. I like the movie a lot better. I'm gonna say it straight out. But this book felt very old to me. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because I understand how people like it and I understand how it's kind of a classic. And I think the principle and the idea behind it are excellent. Like I said, I really enjoyed the movie. It's a coming of age, but it felt very dated to me and slow, which I did not enjoy. I also read When Dimple Met Rishi by Sonia Menon. This is about an Indian American girl, I think, who finally convinces her parents to let her go to this techie camp, and it turns out that her parents have arranged a marriage for her, but she doesn't know it. The boy does, and so he ends up going to the same camp to woo her, and it's a YA contemporary, so obviously they end up together. I don't think that's a spoiler, but you choose. I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars as well. I really wish the coding had been more of a part of it. The romance was such a heavy focus, and I understand that it's a YA contemporary, so the romance is always going to be a focus, but the coding could have been such a bigger and better part of it. It would have been much better had the coding been more important in this story. I gave it a 3 out of 5 just because it was so slow to me. It didn't need to be 400 pages at all. I then read The Tudor by Barb Alexander. This is a non-fiction overview of the Tudor era starting in 1485 with Henry VII defeating Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth. And then obviously going until Elizabeth dies in 1603 and hands the throne over to the Stuarts, also known as her cousins, starting with James I of England, who is James VI of Scotland. I really like the illustrations in this book, but it seemed just a little bit very much sacrificing accuracy for humor at times, and I think it's a great overview if you want to get into Tudors and you know very little or nothing about them. Start with this book because it does provide a great background of the wives and the chronology of it all, but it's not always strictly accurate, and sometimes it's technically accurate, but it sounds very wrong to anybody who knows anything about it. I then read books 2 and 3, or Shadowcaster and Stormcaster, by Cinda Williams-Chima of the Shattered Realms series, which is a continuation of the Seven Realms series. I can't say much about these, but this series follows the same sort of characters, except a generation later, or about 25 years. I really enjoyed these books. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 and this one a 4 out of 5, or something like that. Really enjoyed them. Definitely recommend you read them, but I can't say any more than that because huge spoilers. Another nonfiction and the penultimate book is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. This is a very short, nonfiction sort of self-help book that talks about how it's okay to be imperfect and how you deal with that, and discussing shame specifically. Apparently shame is something that you can study. Who knew? I didn't rate this book because I didn't really know how. I think it has a lot of good points, but it was also acutely uncomfortable to read. I found myself becoming very defensive while doing so. I don't know what else to say about this book because I think it's something you have to read for yourself. And the last book I'm going to talk about, which was technically the first book I read. Oh, that's not true. Alright, so that was not the penultimate book, and this is not the last book, but I'll get to that in a minute. So, the now penultimate book is The Trials of Apollo, The Burning Maze by Rick Riordan. This is the third in the Apollo series. It's not my favorite series. I think I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars because Rick Riordan is fantastic either way, but I just don't like Apollo all that much. I do enjoy Grover and watching him throughout all of this. I think we get to see a lot more of him in this series than we do in necessarily the Percy series. I will say I did not expect the Roman demigods' fates in this. That was interesting. Like I said, I enjoyed this book, but not my favorite. And then the actual last book that I read was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. I know that Harry is crazy angsty in this book. I listened to it on audiobook, but I have always loved this one the most. I don't know why, but I remember the first time I read the series, I reread the 5th one probably 6 times in the course of a month. I just devoured it over and over and over. This is still my favorite book, I think because it's just so dark and they are so snarky and so strong. The kids, they stand up to Umbridge and try to protect Dumbledore and each other, and I love it. I am now reading the 6th one, and hopefully will, well, let me rephrase that, I will finish my audiobook reread of Harry Potter by the end of the year. Those are all of the books I read in September. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe down below. You can check out my Goodreads on Twitter down below. And like I said before, if you want more in-depth thoughts on any of these books, let me know in the comments below, or if you read any of these books, and I will do an individual review. That's all I got for now, so I will see you in my next video. Bye.